Welcome to According to Sam, folks. This is episode 263. Hope you had a good weekend. I'm still going over the election results. I'm going to pick up where I left off in the last podcast. I was saying in the last podcast that Democrats can look at the losses that they just took in this last election, and they could be self-reflective. They could ask questions about what they can change, what they can do different to make themselves more appealing to the electorate. And, I was saying that they could either do that, or they can either start pointing fingers at other people to blame instead of taking any personal blame within themselves as a party. And it doesn't look, we're still, the emotions are still fresh. We're not even a week away from the election. But so far, it doesn't look like Democrats are learning a lot of lessons from this. And there's a lot of finger pointing going around and very little self-reflective attitudes and what can we do different to make ourselves more appealing. And, I think that's a good thing. If you are, if you believe in Trump's agenda and you voted for Trump's agenda and you believe in the MAGA movement, it's going to take a lot longer than 4 years to get this done. And if Democrats aren't learning anything from this, they're not going to make any changes. They're going to make it really easy for Republicans to carry out this agenda and to keep it going beyond Trump's next 4 years. But on this podcast, I am trying to explain what happened to you guys and try to, explain all of this, for the people that are bewildered, the people that are distraught right now. Get this podcast to your Democrat friends. Ask them to watch it because, and the last podcast too, because I'm going to be doing a deep dive into how we got here. And, I think that it's going to be very beneficial to Democrats, to those on the Democrat side that are heartbroken, that are bewildered right now, to understand. You need to understand how we got here. So in the last podcast, we started talking about the lawfare and how the lawfare resurrected Trump when Trump was at a low point in his political career. From the moment that he came on the scene in 2015 and announced that he was going to run for president, his lowest point in his political career from that point in 2015 was in 2022, or at the end of 2022 and in 2023, after the midterm elections in 2022, after many of the candidates that Trump endorsed lost, after Republicans didn't have as huge a win as they had expected. There was no red wave, and Trump was at his lowest point. And we were talking in the last podcast about how the indictments, first the indictment in New York, Alvin Bragg running on prosecuting Trump and going after Trump, indicting him, and then Trump, the winds start to shift for Trump, and he starts becoming more popular because the electorate, particularly the Republican electorate, was coalescing around him after he was indicted. It was a pretty dumb thing for Democrats to continue to tell the electorate that if this guy doesn't win, if the former president of the United States doesn't win this election, that we're going to put him in jail. That was a pretty dumb thing, but that's what you guys did. You told the electorate that Donald Trump was running to stay out of jail. And if he doesn't win, we're going to put the former president of the United States in jail. So people started rallying around him after that. And I played a clip in the last podcast of Fareed Zakaria saying that if Donald Trump, if his name was not Donald Trump, that case in New York never would have been brought. I played also a clip of Andrew Cuomo saying the same thing. I have another clip of Fareed Zakaria here of him doing his postmortem. He reiterates what I was saying about the lawfare, but then he also gives two other reasons why the Democrats lost. And these other two reasons that Fareed Zakaria gives are valid. Me bringing up the lawfare, that explains how Trump won the nomination, because he was actually polling under, in some polls, polling below Ron DeSantis. There was a Wall Street Journal poll that Fareed Zakaria mentions here in this clip, but it had Ron DeSantis actually polling above Trump. And then when the indictments came, that's what changed the winds, and Trump, people started coalescing around Trump. He ends up winning Iowa caucuses, and then, the rest is history from there. But the lawfare explains how he won the nomination, because you can't win the presidency until you win the nomination. So the lawfare explains how he won the nomination. But once he became the nominee, these other issues that Fareed talks about, the woke mind virus that we talked about in the last podcast as well, and all of this wokeness is one of the other issues that Fareed talks about here, and the immigration issue. I believe that those two issues, the woke issue, wokeness, woke mind virus issue, and the immigration issue, would have benefited any Republican nominee. So if Ron DeSantis would have won the nomination and Trump wouldn't have won it, I still think Ron DeSantis would have defeated Kamala Harris or Joe Biden on the issues. It doesn't matter if it was Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley. I believe the Republican candidate, whoever the Republican candidate would have been, if it wasn't Trump, that candidate on those issues, the woke mind virus, the economy, the immigration, I believe the Republican candidate would have won and beat Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, no matter who it was, if it would have been Ron DeSantis coming out of that primary or Nikki Haley. It happened to be Trump, and the way Trump was able to win that nomination is because of the lawfare. That's what I'm getting at. All right, so this is another clip from Fareed Zakaria from Sunday. I want you to pay attention and take a listen to this.
At first glance, it would seem easy to explain last Tuesday's election as part of a 2024 global wave against incumbents beset by post-COVID turmoil and inflation.
So I want you to notice what he says: beset by post-COVID turmoil and inflation. That he's tying the inflation to COVID. They all do that, but he's saying that this was a global thing. That what happened on Tuesday is, and he's going to go further into this and show how this is a global phenomenon of these populist movements having these electoral victories throughout all of the world. And he says that it was beset by COVID and inflation. And what I'm going to show you is that it wasn't beset by COVID and inflation. COVID actually interrupted the populist uprisings that were taking place around the globe, not only here in the United States, around the globe. These populist uprisings were taking place in 2000. They actually came to a head in 2019, as I'm getting ready to show you. And then COVID-19, which the COVID virus happened in 2019, when all these populist uprisings around the globe were coming to a head. COVID-19 actually interrupted these populist uprisings, but they were already well on their way, interrupted by COVID, And then now that COVID is over and now they're continuing again, and it's global. It's not just here in the United States. What happened here on Tuesday is not just happening here in the United States. It's happening globally is what Fareed Zakaria says.
At first glance, it would seem easy to explain last Tuesday's election as part of a 2024 global wave against incumbents beset by post-COVID turmoil and inflation. The UK saw a huge Tory parliamentary majority turn into its thinnest minority in the party's nearly 200-year history. Germany's governing coalition has collapsed amid soaring unpopularity. Emmanuel Macron's party was crushed in France's parliamentary elections. South Korea's opposition party dominated in a huge parliamentary landslide. And even in Japan, where the ruling LDP party has governed almost uninterrupted since 1955, the party lost its House of Representatives majority. So it might have been preordained that Kamala Harris, representing the incumbent administration, lost decisively as well.
So what Fareed Zakaria is talking about, he's talking about all of these movements throughout the globe electorally where, parties that have been in power for long periods of time, the workers' parties, like what happened in France, Macron losing all of those seats. And then, people thought that Marie Le Pen was going to beat him. He ends up defeating Le Pen, but she does a lot better than she had ever done before in this most recent elections. And so what's happening in Germany, so all of these populist movements, Fareed Zakaria says that they were beset again by COVID-19. But what I want to show you is no, these movements were interrupted by COVID-19 because these populist movements around the globe had already started and had been well on their way and had come to a head in 2019 when the virus in 2019, the coronavirus, escapes the lab there in Wuhan. I want you to take a look at this clip. This is a CNN clip about what was going on in 2019.
Across the globe, 2019 has been a year of major protests. Demonstrations erupted over corruption, taxes, the climate, and much more, marking what experts say was a tipping point of ordinary people fed up with measures imposed by a ruling elite. From Paris to Hong Kong, Venezuela,
a ruling elite. So this was populism, and this was bottom-up movements across the globe against the elite.
Imposed by a ruling elite. From Paris to Hong Kong, Venezuela to Algeria, an outpouring of anger raged across nearly every continent, with millions rallying against their governments to tell their leaders, this isn't good enough. Take the Yellow Vest movement in France, an explosive start to the year. Tens of thousands of angry protesters put on their gilets jaunes and hit the streets.
Parce qu'on en a ras-le-bol d'être mené par le bout du nez par un pouvoir méprisant.
What started out as dissent over a rise in a fuel tax in late 2018 gradually morphed into a broader campaign against French President Emmanuel Macron. But Macron has managed to maintain his premiership. Leaders in other countries didn't. In February, a financial crisis and widespread fatigue at the decades-long rule of President Abdelaziz Bouteflika sparked Algeria's biggest protests in more than 20 years. Within a matter of weeks, the old regime was gone. But that wasn't enough for Algerians, who carried on marching for months, calling for sweeping government reforms. And in Hong Kong, peaceful marches started in March over a controversial extradition bill. By summer, escalated into the city's biggest political crisis in modern times, lifting the lid on frustrations and a lack of full autonomy going back decades.
So it was Hong Kong, it was France, it was Algeria, it was Chile, it was other Middle Eastern countries. Other countries in Asia, Malaysia. There were protests, mass protests and uprisings against the political systems, against the political elite all over the world in 2019, escalating in the summer of 2019, and then COVID, coronavirus just happens to leak out of the lab there in Wuhan, in the fall of 2019, and it started spreading in the fall of 2019. And that's why I say that, that these uprisings that you see going on now politically all over the world that Fareed Zakaria is referencing here, these are just movements that are starting to coalesce again and starting to regroup again now that we're beyond COVID, and now many of those problems that these people were protesting back in 2019, COVID didn't make them go away. It interrupted these movements, but the problems that these people were protesting still persist. And now that COVID is over, these people are starting to organize and starting to protest again electorally, and that's why you see these electoral shakeups going on all over the world. And that helps you understand what's going on here in the United States as well, because what's going on here in the United States is not happening in a vacuum. This is a global phenomenon.
Germany's governing coalition has collapsed amid soaring unpopularity. Emmanuel Macron's party was crushed in France's parliamentary elections. South Korea's opposition party dominated in a huge parliamentary landslide. And even in Japan, where the ruling LDP party has governed almost uninterrupted since 1955, the party lost its House of Representatives majority. So it might have been preordained that Kamala Harris, representing the incumbent administration, lost decisively as well. But Harris could have bucked the trend.
No, she couldn't have.
The American economy is doing better than all these other nations.
No, it's not.
Employment is strong. Wages are up. Inflation is down. Productivity is soaring. More importantly, Donald Trump has many strengths as a political figure, but he also has many weaknesses. Let's recall that after January 6, 2021, Trump's approval rating was down to 34% in a CNN poll. In a Marquette Law School poll matchup a year later, Joe Biden was beating him by 10 points nationally, 43-33.
Look at the date here.
Then came the overturning of Roe v. Wade.
Look at the date here. This is when I was telling you that this is the lowest point in Donald Trump's political career. In January of 22, this is after the midterm elections. All these candidates that Donald Trump had endorsed had lost. I mean, they were blaming Donald Trump for Republicans not taking control of the Senate because there were some Senate seats that should have easily been won. But Donald Trump endorsed Oz in Pennsylvania. He lost. He also endorsed Mastriano in Pennsylvania. He lost. He endorsed Herschel Walker in Georgia. He lost. He endorsed Kerry Lake and what's his name in Arizona, the guy that ran for Senate, forget his name. Anyway, and a couple of others. He endorsed the guy in New Mexico who lost that Senate seat. He endorsed the guy in Alaska who lost in a runoff to Susan or to Murkowski. So Donald Trump had that he wasn't doing well politically. And the date, January 2022, going into 2023, when he's about to announce that he's going to run for re-election.
43-33. Then came the overturning of Roe v. Wade and the 2022 midterms, in which the Republicans did very badly for a midterm, and MAGA candidates in particular got crushed. Trump's favorability ratings sank to 31% in a CNN poll, with an unfavorable rating at a staggering 60%. Even Republicans were disillusioned with him. At this point, Trump had led a Republican Party that lost its House majority in 2018, its Senate majority and the presidency in the 2020 cycle, and then fared historically badly in those 2022 midterms. In December 2022, Ron DeSantis was outpolling Trump easily among Republicans in a Wall Street Journal poll.
Look at this. This Wall Street Journal poll had Ron DeSantis at 52% and Trump at 38% in December of 2022. And so what changes this? How does Trump go? And that's what I was trying to explain to you in the last podcast. It was the lawfare. It was the fact that you guys started to indict him and started to use the legal system to persecute him. And that's why people started to coalesce around him. And that's what allowed him to win the nomination. And that's what Fareed Zakaria essentially gets to here. He's laying out the three reasons that he believes that Democrats lost, one of them being the lawfare, but the other two, like I said, immigration and the woke mind virus.
Individuals was being used by millions to gain legal entry. Instead of shutting it down,
Hold on, here we go.
Global inflation is something that was hard to shut down. But there were other issues that Democrats flubbed, which inflamed the opposition and depressed their base. I'm going to talk about them here because it's the right time to do a postmortem. But to avoid appearing to have 20/20 hindsight, I should say that I have noted each of these mistakes at the time, often provoking angry responses from the left. The first big error was the Biden administration's blindness to the collapse of the immigration system and the chaos at the border. An asylum system that was meant for a small number of persecuted individuals was being used by millions to gain legal entry. Instead of shutting it down, liberals branded anyone protesting as heartless and racist. They missed a massive shift in American public opinion in just a few years. In 2020, the percentage of Americans who wanted to decrease immigration was just 28%. By this year, it was 55%. When Kamala Harris went on The View and was asked how she would have differed from Biden, instead of basically saying nothing different, she should have said, "I would have shut down the border early and hard." The second error was an overzealous misuse of law to punish Trump. The most egregious of the cases pursued was Alvin Bragg's one in New York, one that even he was once skeptical of, but was reportedly pressured by some on the left into pursuing. Some cases, like the Georgia one, were legitimate, but the host of them piled on in rapid succession gave the impression that the legal system was being weaponized to get Trump. It confirmed to his base what it had always believed, that overeducated urban liberals were hypocrites, happy to bend rules and norms when it suited their purposes. It's worth noting that in this week's election, a CNN exit poll found that among those who believe that democracy in the U.S. is threatened,
Trump won those people.
Majority supported Trump.
Listen to that. Came from the exit polls that they were asking people how important are the threats to democracy. And of the people who said that the threats to democracy were a big concern for them, 58% opposed to 40% for Harris, 58% for Trump, 40% for Harris. So more people who are concerned about the threats to democracy voted for Trump. Why? Because of the lawfare. Because this is the threats to democracy. People using the legal system and turning 250 years of jurisprudence on its head. These people are the reason that people saw a threat to democracy, not because of Trump. And the funny thing about that is that the media is constantly, day by day, with this narrative that Trump's a threat to democracy, Trump's a threat to democracy, and the people who the electorate believe were the real threat to democracy were the Democrats because of the way they were using the legal system. I just found that to be interesting.
Exit poll found that among those who believe that democracy in the U.S. is threatened, a majority supported Trump. Lawfare turned Trump from being a loser into a victim. And as his indictments grew, his campaign contributions surged and his poll numbers solidified.
Can't deny it.
The final error is a more diffuse one, the dominance of identity politics on the left, which made it push for all kinds of DEI policies that largely came out of the urban academic bubble, but alienated many mainstream voters. There's an irony in claiming to be pro-Latino, by insisting that people use the term Latinx.
So he's talking about the woke mind virus and the wokeness and all that stuff. And that's going to be the hardest thing for Democrats to depart from. And I mean, that's why, I don't think they're going to be making any changes at all, because they cannot get away from the woke mind virus. They can't get away from the wokeness, especially if they're plugged into the media. Because it's interesting that he's saying all this stuff on his show on CNN, and your network, Fareed, CNN, is the biggest purveyor of the woke mind virus and of the wokeness. On a nightly basis, you guys put this propaganda out there, and the media is responsible for the woke mind virus. So I don't think that's going to change at all. I want you to listen to this guy, Jonathan Pye. He's a British commentator, but he makes some really good points, and I want you to take a listen.
Once again, the Democrats have absolutely failed to effectively address the concerns of millions of Americans, particularly the millions who voted for Trump before and just voted for him again. Kamala Harris has completely ignored a genuine beef these people have. A huge section of America thinks the state is corrupt and wields too much power over normal people's lives and just serves the rich and the powerful. And
Listen to that. That the major concern of these movements that started, years ago, as I'm going to show you. I've been talking to you about this and how this populist movement, global populist movements, basically came out of the financial crisis that happened in 2008. And you can trace these populist movements, particularly the ones here in the United States, back to the financial crisis in 2008, which I'm getting ready to do that. But he says that that Kamala Harris ignored that. Because she's part of the establishment. What the populist movement is about what Obama was running on in 2008 when he was calling out Wall Street in the midst of this crisis and making a distinction between Wall Street and Main Street, and how he was going to rebuild the economy from the bottom up instead of top down. That is the dichotomy. That is what is going on, not only here in the United States, but globally. That's what all the protests were about in 2019. That's what all of these electoral movements are about, kicking people out of power today. It's about the populists, the people at the bottom fighting the elite that are at the top. And he says that this was a major concern of the electorate, that the government wields too much power and it only protects the rich and the wealthy and the elite, like Obama did after he ran on change in 2008, and how he's going to empower working people and build the economy from the bottom up. When he got into office, he surrounded himself by all the Wall Street people, surrounded himself by all the globalists and establishment, and then he started to implement the globalist establishment policies like his cousin did before him. But he ran on all of those changes, didn't change anything. What this guy's complaining about, he's saying Kamala Harris wouldn't even run on it. She wouldn't even use the same populist language that Obama was using when he was running as a populist in 2008. And Obama absolutely ran as a populist.
These people have. A huge section of America thinks the state is corrupt and wields too much power over normal people's lives and just serves the rich and the powerful. And they're not wrong. Trump didn't create this belief, he just used it. Trump
didn't create this, he just used it. He harnessed it, is what he said. Very important.
Not wrong. Trump didn't create this belief, he just used it. He harnessed it to his own ends, but he is the only person talking about these things. He's voicing concerns that nobody else is. And when Donald Trump says he plans to dismantle the deep state and reclaim democracy from Washington, that might sound chilling or perhaps a bit authoritarian, but to many normal, sane Americans, that sounds amazing. Taking a flamethrower to governmental institutions is a genuinely attractive offer to millions of Americans. It's not about left or right or good versus evil. It's not about MAGA, it's not about religion or abortion. They just feel powerless. They feel the state doesn't protect them from injustice, it just protects itself. And Kamala Harris has completely ignored the issue, handing Trump the keys to the White House, as well as the Senate and possibly the House in the process, whilst thinking we're right and he's wrong and that's good enough for us. Shame on them. The feeling all across America is at least he's going to do something. At least something will change. If you're going to go head to head with a man who is willing to lie through his teeth to get elected, who will say anything to get elected, then you better have something better to say yourself. Instead, all we got was this puke-inducing on the sofa with Oprah bullshit. This election is about joy over hate. It's about lifting people up. No, it isn't. It's about who is going to actually do something. Change something. You can't just run on sunshine and lollipops and just not being the other guy. If she's not going to do anything meaningful, then why vote for her? And it's almost like no one gives a fuck which rich Hollywood A-listers are supporting Kamala Harris. It's almost as if unless Katy Perry, Harrison Ford, Beyonce, Taylor Swift, Eminem, DiCaprio,
and that's why,
Clooney...
Exactly. That's why I did the podcast about the Diddycrats the day before the election and making a reference to all of these celebrities that she brought out. How out of touch is that? How out of touch is it to be campaigning with Liz Cheney? How out of touch is it to have the chairman of BlackRock, his brother, running your campaign? How out of touch? I mean, and that's what the Democrat Party has become. Out of touch. Out of touch. And that's why they were so surprised by what happened last Tuesday. That's why they're so bewildered right now, and they don't understand what went on is because they live in an elitist bubble and they're out of touch. And many of them are just plugged in to the fake news, the media that's reinforcing that. So the populist movement, as I've been telling you, here in the United States, started on the right with the Tea Party. The Tea Party started in response to the financial crisis that happened in 2008 and the bank bailout and all the things that were going on in that transition from Obama into Bush is when the Tea Party started. Already showed you the Santilli speech that began that. And these Tea Party organizations started popping up all across the country, organizing. This is the beginning of the split within the Republican Party. As I told you, that this was a movement. So like I said about the Democrats, they can take this loss and they can look internally. That's what the Tea Party members, most of these people were former Republicans a lot of them didn't leave the Republican Party when they became Tea Party Republicans. They just distinguished themselves from the other Republicans and said that we are Tea Party Republicans. We are within the Republican Party, but we're a movement from within the Republican Party to reform the Republican Party. The Democratic Party has never, ever done that. They've tried to do it, and we're going to talk about that here in a moment. But what these guys did in the Tea Party, Republicans, they looked inward and says, how can we reform our party? How can we change the Republican Party to make, this is before Trump comes on the scene. Trump is not anywhere on the scene at all. His MAGA movement isn't on the scene. This is, members of the Republican Party separating from the Republican Party, not separating, but starting a new conservative movement within the Republican Party to turn the Republican Party back to Republican or back to conservative principles. And a lot of it had to do with challenging Republican establishment candidates, primarying Republican establishment candidates, getting them out of there, forcing the Republican Party to change. And much of the principles that the Tea Party movement wanted to instill within the Republican Party and the changes that they wanted to make within the Republican Party, the Tea Party was successful. The Republican Party under MAGA right now incorporated a lot of the principles, many of the principles that were being articulated by the Tea Party back in 2009. So the Tea Party was successful. Democratic Party has never done this. The Democratic Party has never had a reformation that has taken place within the party where they have primaried establishment candidates, got these old school candidates like Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, these people who have been there forever running the party, the hardcore establishment that are rooted in the party. They still control the party. There was never any populist movement to reform the Democratic Party like what happened with the Republican Party. But there was a populist movement in the Democratic Party that started within the Democratic Party. They didn't have the same success as the Tea Party. And there's a reason why. I'm going to explain that to you. But again, and I was explaining to you when we were going over the financial crisis, that the Occupy movement was the beginning of the left-wing populist movement. And it also started as a response to the 2007-2008 financial crisis. It says right here, part of the response to the 2007-2008 financial crisis and the subprime mortgage crisis. The Occupy movement was an international populist social political movement that expressed opposition to social economic inequality. So this is happening on the left wing. And this, so the Tea Party movement, populist movement, started in 2009. When Obama was sworn in, this movement is getting off the ground at the same time Obama. And again, like I said, Obama used his race to demonize these Tea Party people and say that they were motivated by race. That the only reason that they were starting their movement when they did is because America had elected their first black president. Nothing could be further from the truth, but Obama and his surrogates used that narrative to demonize the Tea Party. But again, the Tea Party was focused on the policy, not the person. And Bush and Obama had the same policy. But it started in 2009 immediately. The Occupy movement doesn't start until 2011. So 2 years later, September 2011 is when the Occupy movement starts there in Manhattan. And I've explained to you the reason why this movement starts later is because many of these people that were part of the Occupy movement were people that supported Barack Obama in 2008, supported his populist movement when he ran on change. How he was going to tackle Wall Street, rebuild the economy from the bottom up, Wall Street versus Main Street, all this stuff. All these people, these left-wing populists, they voted for Obama and they believed Obama was going to bring that change. So they don't start, protesting and forming this movement until 2011 when they see that Obama's not going to do anything. Nothing that Obama said that he was going to do, where he was going to enact any populist policies. So these people start to protest, and then Obama's running for re-election the next year. This is September 2011. So, in a few months, you're getting ready to go into 2012. Obama's going to be in the middle of his re-election. He doesn't need a populist, left-wing populist movement protesting him. So he sicked his government on this movement to squash this movement is what Obama did. And then he runs for re-election against Romney in 2012 and ends up winning re-election, but he gets 4 million fewer votes. Many of these people, they didn't vote for Obama for re-election. Many of these people had saw Obama for what he was by that time. They didn't vote for him for re-election. And then Obama wins re-election. And then during Obama's second term, many of these people from Occupy Wall Street, these left-wing populists, they start looking, well, what are we going to do in 2016? Who's going to lead our movement as we go into 2016? At the end of Obama's presidency, he didn't fulfill any of these populist any of the populist agenda and the progressive agenda that we wanted him to. So who's going to be our champion as we go into 2016 is what these people start asking, these left-wing populists. And the answer to that question is Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders came on the scene in 2016 to lead this populist movement that had already started before Bernie Sanders came on the scene to grab the reins and to lead this movement. And it's very important because, like I was saying about the Tea Party had already had gotten off the ground. It had already started to change the Republican Party in the way that that they wanted to see the Republican Party change, as far as becoming more conservative, and other things we're going to talk about, the principles from the Tea Party that are the same principles that the MAGA movement champions now. But this movement had started already, and then Trump comes in 2016, and then he grabs the reins of this movement, of the Tea Party, of what was formerly the Tea Party movement, becomes the MAGA movement. Bernie Sanders is the same thing. The Occupy movement, which started in 2011, was already well on its way. Left-wing populism, the progressive movement that these people wanted change, they didn't get from Obama, from the 2008, didn't support Obama in 2012, and was looking for that champion as they're going into 2016. And Bernie Sanders comes on the scene and he grabs the reins. The Tea Party already had a philosophical leader that was articulating many of the things that the Tea Party was built on back in 2009, and he was the philosophical leader of the Tea Party movement, and that person was Ron Paul. Ron Paul was the philosophical leader of what was going on with the Tea Party. He was the one who was articulating the foreign policy, the domestic policy. I'd never heard anyone talk about the size and role of government before when I started listening to Ron Paul in 2011, and when after he ran in 2008, and then he was also getting ready to run in 2012. So he ran in 2008, and then he also ran in 2012. And he was the one talking about, I mean, he had been in Congress for years. He's a libertarian. He'd been in Congress in Texas, from a Texas district for years. He's a medical doctor, but when he was in Congress, his nickname was Dr. No, because he would vote no on all spending. Before Ron Paul came along, I didn't even know there was a different type of Republican. I thought all Republicans were the Rockefeller, Bush type of Republicans, neoconservative Republicans. And this guy began to articulate a different type of conservatism, a different type of Republican Party, and he was being championed by the Tea Party. He was the philosophical leader of the Tea Party. And again, he ran in 2008 for president and also ran in 2012. So the Occupy movement really didn't have, a leader before Bernie Sanders comes along, but the Tea Party did. And that guy was Ron Paul. So this is an interesting tweet and retweet here. And it's interesting in light of what I'm talking about here is because Jake Uygur, if you know Jake Uygur from the Young Turks, he's one of those people who was a supporter of Bernie Sanders. He was helping Bernie Sanders campaign with his Young Turks program on YouTube, and he's a left-wing populist, Jake Uygur. Joe Walsh here was in Congress, and he won his seat in Congress as a Tea Party candidate. So Joe Walsh, he went to Congress, on that wave of populists that sent all of these, Tea Party candidates to Congress. Also, you should know that there was no Freedom Caucus in Congress before the Tea Party. The Freedom Caucus actually came out of the Tea Party when all of these Tea Party populists were being sent to Congress. So Joe Walsh is from the Tea Party, and Jake Uger was a Bernie Sanders supporter. And Jake Uger tweets first, "Don't blame the voters. Don't blame the Russians. Don't blame everyone else. Listen to your voters." He's trying to get them to look at themselves. They just sent you a huge wake-up call. They want you to go populist, is what Jake Uger says. If Democrats double down on loser corporate establishment comes from me, a corporate establishment Democrats, they'll keep losing elections forever. Turn around. And then Joe Walsh retweets Jake Uger talking about left-wing populists. And then, he was in Congress from the Tea Party, from the right. And he says, "I've been saying this for 6 years. We're living in a populist movement. Trump is a bad populist. I disagree. A divisive populist. I disagree. A demagogue, a lying populist." Cause he don't like Trump for some reason. Joe Walsh, he's mad at Trump. But Democrats have never recognized or understood the populist movement. No, Democrats have understood the populist movement. They just fought against it. They wanted to keep the establishment in power, and they worked to prevent Bernie Sanders from reforming, and the left-wing populists, the Democrat establishment, they worked to prevent this guy and the movement that he was leading from reforming the Democratic Party the way that Ron Paul, the Tea Party, and then eventually the MAGA movement reformed the Republican Party. And there's no doubt now, after Trump won last Tuesday, that the old Republican Party's gone. The establishment, Rockefeller, neoconservative Republicans, they're awash. They're gone. That the Republican Party is new. It's the MAGA Republican Party, and that's something brand new. And the transformation of the Republican Party is complete. But like I'm telling you, it started in 2009. Started with the Tea Party movement back in 2009 as a response of the financial crisis. And Democrats did not allow the Bernie Sanders populist, the progressive movement, to do what the MAGA movement and the Tea Party movement had done in the Republican Party. It's something very important to understand. That is why I've been talking about the Bush-Clinton dynasty and explaining the Bush-Clinton dynasty to you, because this is the establishment. That's what the Bush-Clinton dynasty represents, the establishment, and the populist movements, whether it's the left-wing populist, progressive movement, or the right-wing populist, the Tea Party and now MAGA movement. Those populist movements are movements against the establishment. And again, that was what was going on globally in 2019. That's what's going on right now globally. And I can't even make it any more clear to you what's going on. If you don't understand what's going on now, I can't even make it more clear to you, but I'm going to try. This is Piers Morgan's show. And a few days ago, this is after the election, he's got Crystal Ball here. Crystal Ball was a Bernie Sanders supporter. She was part of the left-wing populist movement that saw, the Bernie Sanders rallies. And when Bernie Sanders ran in 2016, he was holding just as big rallies as Trump was holding. This guy had huge popularity in 2016. It looked like he had all of the momentum. He won Michigan. He would go and win a state, and they were using the superdelegates then. He would go and win a state and get more votes, and then Hillary Clinton would end up getting more delegates because she had the superdelegates. They were doing everything in their power to disenfranchise this guy and his movement. But he was having huge rallies in 2016 when he was leading this left-wing progressive populist movement. So Crystal Ball was part of that. So was Jake Uger. I forget this guy's name, but then this is Congressman Dan Crenshaw on the panel. I want you to take a listen to what they discuss here.
When Democrats were crushing Republicans was in the 90s. That was in the 90s, and they were a very different party back then. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, well, the world was very different, and neoliberalism was absolutely ascendant there then. Now,
what is she talking about? Neoliberalism. Neoliberalism, what she's talking about is this guy. So in the 90s, neoliberalism was ascendant. What is neoliberalism? Neoliberalism is the same thing as neoconservatism. That the neoliberal is not a classical liberal, and the neoconservative is not a classical conservative. And at the same time as the neoconservatives were on the rise, the neoliberals are on the rise because they represent the same thing. That's what she's saying here, that the neoliberalism was on the rise in the 90s.
It was in the 90s. That was in the 90s, and they were a very different party back then. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, well, the world was very different, and neoliberalism was absolutely ascendant there then. Now we're in a post-neoliberal world. And so what I'm not talking about a shift to the left. I'm talking about a shift top versus bottom. You know, Trump has his version of fake populism. He's got his villains. He's got his scapegoats, immigrants, cultural elites. Bernie Sanders, when he ran in the Occupy movement, when they were ascendant, talked about the 1%, talked about the millionaires and billionaires, talked about corporate greed, talked about unfettered capitalism. That's the shift that I'm talking about. And we know that it was effective because that Bernie to Trump pipeline, that was real. People who were voting for Bernie Sanders, who were Latinos, who were working class, who were Joe Rogan bros, who were Joe Rogan himself, have now, when faced with the choice between Trumpism and neoliberalism, chosen Trumpism. When faced with the choice between Trumpism and Bernie Sanders left populism, chose left populism.
Ooh, she says a lot there. Crystal Ball says a lot there. First of all, she's talking about the Bernie bros to Trump pipeline. That a lot of these guys, these young guys that Trump won, that back in 2016, they were the Bernie bros. The Bernie bros. You were calling them Bernie bros back in 2016 when Bernie was leading left-wing populism from the left, the progressive populists that were challenging the neoliberalism of the Clinton administration, the neoliberalism of the Obama administration. And they were left-wing populists, and they were Bernie bros. And she says now there's a pipeline from the Bernie bros to Trump, because when given the choice between voting for Trump, which was a populist, who is a populist, he may be right-wing populist, but there's a lot of crossover between what Bernie Sanders and Trump were saying as far as policy in 2016, a lot of crossover. So it was an easy transition from Bernie Sanders progressive populism to Donald Trump MAGA populism, conservative populism. And she says, but and given the choice, even from a right-wing populist, they would rather have populism than the establishment, than neoconservatives, than neoliberalism. If given the choice between populism, although it may be right-wing populism, then they'd rather have populism than the neoconservative or neoliberalism establishment. But she says that if given a choice between right-wing populism and left-wing populism, then they would select left-wing populism. But there was no real champion there for left-wing populism. That the Democratic establishment, they overran Bernie Sanders and his movement, so that left these Bernie bros with only one choice if they wanted populism, and that was Trump. That's what she's trying to say here. And then she uses Joe Rogan as an example, because Joe Rogan was a Bernie Sanders supporter, and then he ends up endorsing Donald Trump this year in this election. I want you to listen to what Joe Rogan says in his show when he's interviewing the trigonometry guys. Take a listen.
I mean, there's just because of my appearance, there's always been this assumption that I'm some right-wing MAGA guy, which is I was a Bernie supporter. Mm-hmm.
Bernie supporter.
I am I'm a politically homeless person for sure. I always considered myself a left-wing person. I never thought I would ever vote right-wing. But then the tides of culture shifted in a very bizarre way. And it just made me, over time, much more aware of what this stuff is really all about. Because what this stuff is really all about is just these natural human behavior patterns and these tribal instincts that we have. And overpowers all discussions. It overpowers what's good for the collective group. It overpowers everything. It's just people pick a fucking team, and then whatever that team says, they can do no harm. They will do their best to marginalize the horrible effects of the furthest extreme version of that, whether it's Antifa or the Proud Boys. They'll minimalize the... It's the same thing, man. It's the same thing. If you look at what's going on with the liberals right now, so progressives they want the war in Ukraine to be funded. They want to censor speech online. And they want to give the World Health Organization, which is deeply influenced by Big Pharma, including the FDA, deeply influenced. The revolving door between the FDA and pharmaceutical drug companies is legendary. And they want to give them control over what we take and what we don't take. And that's crazy.
Joe Rogan says, I didn't sign up for that. That's not populism. That's what he says. I was a Bernie supporter. I supported progressive populism. A lot of people thought that I was a right winger, but I was a Bernie supporter. And I supported left-wing populism, progressive populism, but I didn't sign up for all this crazy woke mind agenda. I didn't sign up for all of this, funding the Ukraine war and keeping all these wars going. That's not populism. That's not left-wing populism. That's not any kind of populism. He says, I didn't sign up for this. And he is just an example of what Crystal calls here the Bernie to Trump pipeline. And that was a big pipeline. But Bernie Sanders, it plays a lot, bears a lot of responsibility as well. And I'm going to explain that to you here in a moment with the little time that I have. I want you to listen to Steve Kornacki break down some of the numbers from the election. He goes further into what I was just explaining to you.
Yeah, well, Kristen, you said it, not just Donald Trump winning the election, but winning the popular vote. First time in 2 decades for a Republican. And how did he do it? He did it by transforming the Republican Party. It is now more diverse than it's ever been in modern times, and certainly much more than when Donald Trump first came on the scene 8 years ago. A lot of ways to look at this. How about this year? When it says pre-Trump, that's the last presidential election before Donald Trump started running. You got to go back to 2012 for that. Remember, 3 straight elections, Trump's been the Republican candidate. So pre-Trump, voters under 30 were going for the Democrats by 23 points. Folks with incomes under 50,000, 22 points for the Democrats. Folks without college degrees, 4 points for the Democrats. That's pre-Trump. What comes out of this election? Look at some of these shifts. The youth vote, that Democratic margin cut more than in half.
The youth vote. If you went to Bernie Sanders rallies in 2016, it was full of young people. And when Trump was running and Bernie was running and having those big rallies in 2016, the shakeup, it was full of young people. The young people. And Trump has taken the young, those are the Bernie supporters. Those are the Bernie bros and girls that were part of that Bernie Sanders movement, and Trump has brought them over. Also, the working people, blue collar people, they were all there at the Bernie Sanders rallies. 2016, blue collar. Trump got them now. No college degree. They're all there at the Bernie Sanders rallies in 2016. Trump got them now. Trump got them.
Voters under 50,000, now a Republican constituency. Voters without a college degree. Look at that shift. Now a core Republican constituency. And then we can talk about race, ethnicity. This gets in.
Just expand. It's a huge coalition that Trump put together. I don't have much time, but I have quite a bit that I still want to share with you guys. I'm just going to run through this stuff real quick. So we're talking about Ron Paul and how Ron Paul was the philosophical person who was laying out the ideals of the Tea Party, which transformed into the MAGA movement that Trump now leads. And like I was explaining to you a couple of podcasts ago, that in 2008, that this was Ron Paul's son, Rand Paul, who's in the Senate. This was his scary Halloween costume, $10 trillion. Right now, We're getting ready to add another $1 trillion to the debt here in a couple of days. It's going to be 36 trillion. But in 2008, just 16 years ago, it was $10 trillion. So the debt was a major part of the, and spending, not only the debt, you get the debt because of the spending, but, the debt and spending was a major part of the philosophical principles of the Tea Party, of the movement that, Bush had run up the debt, and we know why Bush ran up the debt, because that was what he wanted. That's what the objective was, because they were afraid we were getting ready to be debt free. So Bush had done all of this spending. So that was a major, point of contention that the Tea Party and this conservative movement that was happening within the Republican Party, they wanted to stop the spending. They wanted to control the debt. Well, that's a major, point of focus of the MAGA movement. The isolationism that people say that the Republican Party has, the isolationism, not wanting to fight all of these foreign wars and send all of our money, off to all these different countries. That was part of a root, philosophical principle of the Tea Party that was articulated many times by Ron Paul. This was part of the messaging that he was, using when he ran in 2008 and when he ran in 2012. And this was a major part of the Tea Party principles. It's a major part of MAGA right now in these wars. Stop all these foreign wars and sending all of our money overseas. This is Ron Paul when he ran in 2012. He was running in the primary against Mitt Romney. I want you to take a listen to something that he says here.
I served 5 years in the military. I've had a little experience. I've spent a little bit of time over in the Pakistan, Afghanistan area, as well as in Iran. But I wouldn't wait for my generals. I'm the commander-in-chief. I make the decisions. I tell the generals what to do, and I'd bring them home as quickly as possible, and I'd get them
He's talking about Afghanistan, how fast he would have brought the troops back home from Afghanistan if he was president.
But I wouldn't wait for my generals. I'm the commander-in-chief. I make the decisions. I tell the generals what to do, and I'd bring them home as quickly as possible, and I'd get them out of Iraq as well, and I wouldn't start a war in Libya. I'd quit bombing Yemen, and I'd quit bombing Pakistan. I'd start taking care of people here at home, because we could save hundreds of billions of dollars. Our national security is not enhanced by our presence over there. We have no purpose there. We should learn the lessons of history, and the longer we're there, the worse things are, and the more danger we're in as well, because our presence there is not making friends, let me tell you.
And Congressman Paul joins me now. We just played the response you said about military serving overseas. That really does put you in stark contrast to many of the people on the stage tonight.
Yeah, I think so. It did 4 years ago. But what I sense now...
And you've been consistent all along.
Yeah, and what I sense now is there's not so much of a dramatic difference. If you listen carefully, some of them are coming our way, my way, the way that I believe we should go. But where the real difference is with the people. If you look at the polls and how many people think we should be in Libya and how many people think we ought to get out of Afghanistan. So that's where I feel completely different. Although, I don't obviously have agreement, and my statement was different because I'm rather emphatic, because I think the issue of war is so important on principle, because it's such a deadly issue, but it's also a major economic issue. I look at it carefully because all great nations usually go down when they spread themselves too far around the world. They go into an empire, then they can't afford it, no matter how well-intentioned it is. And I know those who disagree with me are well-intentioned and think this is very necessary, but financially it's very, very risky. And of course, I pointed out, politically, it's a lot easier cutting this overseas spending than it is to go after child health care.
Listen to that. It's much easier to cut overseas spending, cut the funding to Ukraine, stop that war, than it is to cut our domestic programs, is what he's saying. And that we should take care of America first is basically what he's saying. America first. He's the first one who started to articulate the America First principle. He was leading the populist movement, the Tea Party. And then something interesting happened in that election in 2012 is because Romney ends up getting the nomination. The convention is there in Florida that year, and Ron Paul wants a speaking agreement or a speaking. He wants to speak at the convention, and he wants to address the delegates there and talk about his message, his liberty message, and the messages of his platform. And Romney wouldn't allow him to speak.
Yeah, and I think that
Ron Paul ended up not endorsing. He refused to endorse Mitt Romney in that election in 2012, which is huge because Romney was already having problems being a Mormon. He was having problems, securing the base of the party. And when Mitt Romney didn't allow Ron Paul to speak and Ron Paul didn't endorse Mitt Romney, many of Ron Paul's supporters, many of Ron Paul's supporters in 2012 didn't vote for Mitt Romney. Ron Paul is the very first Republican that I ever voted for in my life. I voted for him in the primary in 2012. When he didn't win the primary, I didn't vote in 2012 for Romney or for Obama. And a lot of people didn't vote for Romney or Obama. A lot of Republicans who supported Ron Paul did not support Romney. But then when Trump comes along 4 years later, these Ron Paul people did vote for Trump and did support Trump. That's why Trump had the numbers to win. Now, something interesting happened with Bernie Sanders. He was cheated. He was cheated in 2016. He was cheated in 2020. This guy, instead of doing what Ron Paul did and refusing to support Hillary Clinton after he was cheated and refusing to endorse her, which would have boosted his credibility if he would have refused to endorse Hillary Clinton when they cheated him in 2016, that would have boosted his credibility. But what does he do? He turns his back on his people and his supporters and his people that were out in the streets, knocking on doors, campaigning for him. He turns his back on them after the DNC and the establishment. They stab him in the back. They don't allow him to get the nomination. And then this guy turns around and endorses. He endorses Hillary Clinton. He tries to get all of his voters to come over and vote for Hillary Clinton after, he called her an establishment candidate and that she was in the pocket of Wall Street. And then, now they stab me in the back and don't allow me to get the nomination. I'm going to endorse her. And I want you guys who were, supporting me on progressive populism, I want you to go and vote for the woman who I said for months and months that she was in the pocket of Wall Street. Can you believe this guy? Then did the same thing in 2020 with Joe Biden. So he handled things a lot different from the way that Ron Paul handled things. And the two different movements went in two different directions. And one of them was successful and one of them wasn't. That's just a little bit of breaking down what went on and how it relates to this most recent election that we just had, because there is a relationship. I'll get back into this on Friday. I hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you on Friday.